Okay. I think we're live.
Yay,
We're live
technology.
for episode 2 of season 2. Oh, I didn't think about that. It's season 2, episode 2.
Oh,
So,
yay. And it's
yeah.
Turkey Talk Tuesday.
And it's Turkey Talk Tuesday. I don't know if we told you. I don't think I told you that, Andy. Yeah, we decided it was Turkey Talk Tuesday because
Cool.
whenever you can get a little bit of alliteration in there, it just,
Makes it more fun.
yeah, it's icing on the cake. Icing on the cake. Um, but I mean, I guess so, Andy, I think this is the first time we've had you on Living in the Texas Hill Country. I think we've had you on Cup Chat before, but this is your first time on Living with Texas Hill Country.
That's correct.
Okay. So, I
Awesome.
mean, so Andy he's part of AgriLife, but he's actually like on the flip side. So whereas Carly and I are extension, technically speaking, Andy is the he's technically part extension too, but he has the title of research. Like I think that's technically what you're considered as a
Yeah.
AgriLife
Yeah.
research
Mhm. That's true.
per
So, yep,
person,
75
professor.
sub split appointment. So, yeah, assistant professor and extension wildlife specialist, but primarily my appointment is research focused. 75%, 25% extension. So, yep, that's the gig, and it's a lot of fun because I get to kind of be in both worlds and
Yes.
do things like this, which is cool. So,
And you are based out of San Angelo, the San Angelo
mhm,
Research Station.
that's right.
So,
Oh,
and
I
I
didn't know
think
that.
I was gonna say you've been here for, is it
A
just two? Have you
little
hit
over a
two?
year.
A little over a year.
Started,
Okay, I was like, has it
yeah.
only been a year? I thought it's been 2.
Seems like a long time, huh?
I feel like I've known you forever, Andy. It's not a
All
bad thing. I
those,
promise. I
it's
promise.
all those habitat homes and everything
It,
else that we that we
very,
do. So,
very, very true.
yeah.
So, I mean, I guess tell us a little bit about yourself, Andy. Where'd you grow up?
Okay,
Where'd you go to school? All that fun stuff.
I will do so. So this is actually home. So I'm based at the AgriLife Research and Extension Center in San Angelo, out in Tom Green County, sort of, you know, relative to the hill country, sort of the edge of the Edwards Plateau, in that cool place where the Southern High Plains meets the Edwards Plateau meets the Chihuahuan Desert. I can go a little ways in either direction and get into different kinds of ecoregions, which is really fun. But I was born and raised here. So grew up around San Angelo, stomping around in the mesquite pasture and hunting and fishing and doing all that stuff. And I did my undergraduate and my master's work in biology at Angelo State University, and then went to Texas A&M, in wildlife and fisheries. The department was the wildlife and fisheries sciences back then. Now it's range wildlife and fisheries management. And so, um, I did my PhD work on, interior least terns, which are not anything close to a turkey, but, um, it's Turn Talk Tuesday also, I guess.
Mm.
Um, no, so that was a focus of my PhD work, and then from there worked in a few places. Spent some time at Lamar University, was my first faculty appointment. Um, AV and ecology has always been my focus. Um, and then Audubon, Texas lured me away for a while. I was the director of conservation for them. One of the programs that I was, participating and an administrator for, and all of that was the quail and grassland bird program, and so upland game birds was a focus there. And then taught actually at an undergraduate university, Wayland Baptist University, up in Plainview for about 12 years. And then my wife and I decided, hey, it's time to get closer to family. And so we had property around San Angelo, and we came back, built a house, and then the opportunity with AgriLife came up, and here I am. So
Awesome.
that's
So
the short version.
you're a fellow bird nerd like me.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I don't think I've ever asked you this. I mean, and it's a really hard question to ask. Do you have like a favorite bird or like a top 5
Ooh,
favorite birds?
ooh. Um, my favorite bird is vermilion flycatcher.
Really?
just because of the places that it occurs, and it's just so brilliant. It's not, a lot of people expect you to say painted bunting, right? But that's not, those are cool, but vermilion flycatcher is my favorite. Just, seeing it on the landscape is always fun, and, it's a good indicator of habitat and all of that. And so, overall, that's just kind of the go-to answer for me. Um,
They're an easy one to spot. I mean, they're bright
yeah,
red.
yeah,
Like
easy to,
even brighter red than a cardinal. Like
yep.
I don't know what it is about that like red, but it just like I don't know, it just shines. I
Yeah,
don't know.
like, and they sally up in the air and
Mm.
call out and draw attention to themselves. It's a cool species and has a neat ecology. It's a migrant, so how do you not admire a little bitty tiny red bird that can migrate a couple thousand miles into a different part of the Americas and then come back every year, maybe to the same spot, who knows? But yeah, so that's overall my favorite. But I know it's Turkey Talk Tuesday, but it is also one of my favorites. As far as, game birds go, that's the one that's the most interesting and
They're
fun to
they're
me.
they're
So
they're fun.
yeah,
Like turkeys are
yep.
a lot of fun, especially with during the breeding season when they're doing their thing. Like there's nothing like waking up and you just hear turkeys just like sounding off and you slam a car door and they lose their minds. You're
I
like,
know
it's a car door.
that's what I was going to say. It's so funny because they just, whenever the gobblers are really going, it doesn't matter what noise you make, they respond. They just get crazy, and um, fun things happen in the field too. There's stories of people calling turkeys in and they get chased around, and it's just crazy. Like, sometimes you've got to hide and be quiet and secretive if you're trying to hunt one, but I know of folks who have just they couldn't they couldn't get a young Jake to just stay away from them. So,
Yeah. I mean, I think every year
it's
you have like about this time, yeah, you get on the
yep,
news of like people getting attacked by
yep.
turkeys. And it's like you kind of laugh about it, but if you're in that situation, if you've ever like been around a turkey or seen turkeys, they're nasty. They're
They can
mean.
be they can be they can be mean. They're
They
trying to fight for mates and
they got
do their thing.
spurs and I mean, yeah.
But yeah, just keep your distance and it's okay.
So, I mean, I guess we're talking about turkeys, so let's dive into a little bit of turkey management because in the hill country, I mean, I'd say probably like besides deer, bird wise, I think pretty well like turkey and quail are like the one thing that I say just about everybody wants
Yeah,
on their property, but it's one of those where unfortunately the numbers are not in some areas are not what they used to be. So
yep,
people are trying to bring them back. But I think that the challenging thing about turkeys is, I mean, they wander. They they go
they
a
cover a
long
lot of
way.
ground. Yeah.
So I mean, I guess I don't. I guess I'm trying to think of like a really good place. Carly, do you have a really good place to start? I mean, it's one of those things where it all is connected, but
I know very little about turkeys, so
okay.
I'm absorbing. But I'm sure I'll come up with something soon.
I mean, I guess let's talk about. I mean, I guess let's talk about roosting. Let's talk
Okay.
about a little bit of roosting habitat and what that kind of looks like
Cool.
for a turkey. I think most people know what a roost is, but for those who don't, what is a
hmm
roost?
Well, so most of the year, hens and toms and jakes all will utilize, mature trees. There's a long list. If you do a quick search for turkey habitat or turkey roost habitat, you'll get information that's usually pretty good and accurate about kind of what they prefer. But you're looking for, large mature hardwoods, pecans, oaks, cottonwoods, depending on the part of the state or the part of the country you're in. large trees, and a lot of times in the hill country, for example, if you have a small, group of mature oaks out in a out in an open area, you can see turkeys roosting in those pretty routinely. It depends on the place. Oftentimes, those big trees that you see, like groves of pecans in a riparian area along a river or a creek, cottonwoods and stuff, and maybe a little bit more drier area. So if it's a big mature tree that's got, a lot of horizontal limbs for a big bird to perch on, that can be good roosting habitat. And, there's a lot of ifs that go with that. So, you know, part of the challenge in parts of Texas, especially the drier parts of the state, is, those kinds of, large mature trees in some places are disappearing. We have where I'm at in the Concho Valley, Snowmageddon a few years ago really did some damage to our pecans, and we have stretches of, the Concho River that the pecans are significantly declining, and that, there's still some stands that are available for roosting habitat, but they're not as many as there were. And so that's one of the potential causes for some of the population declines we've seen in certain places. Um, but it's not just the presence of those trees, but also um, you have to have a good approach. So turkeys want some screening cover. They don't want to be totally exposed as they approach a roost, but then they also need to kind of have some clear area right around that roost where they can see down when they're on the roost, but also where they can get up into that roosting site, um, without a lot of obstruction. And they need landing zones out away from those roost trees, those roosting areas where they can safely land and not fly into something. And so there's got to be a balance of, kind of younger trees that are growing in the landscape, maybe some shrubs and stuff, but also some open areas for access into and out of those roosts. So if you can imagine a big old oak tree in a pasture in the hill country, that could potentially be a roosting site depending on what else is around and nearby. So
And so with those roost sites, you had mentioned that a lot of the times those big mature trees are by riparian areas, but they don't necessarily, it's one of those where the tree just happens to be near a riparian area because those trees need a lot of water. It's not necessarily
Mhm.
that the turkeys need water, but the roost site doesn't necessarily need to be
Right.
near a riparian area, if that makes
Right, right.
any
It's
sense.
just in our drier parts of the hill country or West Texas, that's just where you find the trees. Um, depending on where you're at. And maybe if it's a ranch, sometimes a lot of ranch homesteads will have big trees that
Hmm.
regularly get irrigated or whatever. And I know of a few places where that's where you find a lot of
Yep.
turkeys roosting a lot of times. So it's big mature trees wherever you find them, and within a landscape context that's beneficial to turkeys, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Do you
yeah.
know, okay, super random question. Do you know how high turkeys can actually fly?
You
I mean,
know,
they're pretty good fly. I mean, I guess it is powered flight because yeah, they can go from the ground up into a
yeah.
tree, but I mean, they're
Mhm.
so massive. I've never seen a turkey, like I've never measured. I don't know. I'm sure someone has measured how high a turkey can fly.
I don't know. I mean, I have seen turkeys roosting on the tops of power poles.
What?
Um,
That's tall.
and yeah, and some of these pecans and oaks, they get way up in there. So,
So maybe higher than we
um,
think.
yeah, yeah. I mean, how high is that?
Yeah.
I've seen them easily roosting in, a pecan tree at 30, 40, 30 feet up in the air. It's not uncommon, and it's a little bit intimidating if you're around whenever you hear them taking off in the evening up into the roost, or in the morning coming out of a
Yep.
roost somewhere.
Especially if
This
you don't know
big
they're
Small
there.
giant.
Oh,
helicopter.
it'll scare the bejesus out of you till you realize what it is. You're like, oh, it's just a turkey. But
Yep.
still, I mean, they're not quite. I mean, it would be like a quail flushing on like steroids is basically like
Right.
the best way to describe it. Because yeah, I guess they pretty similar flight pattern to a quail. Super fast, short flight patterns, but
Short
they go a little
bursts.
bit higher
Yeah,
than a
they don't
quail.
stay in the air long.
Mm-mm-mm-mm. No, no. So,
Do
oh, go ahead, Carly.
do people ever make like like an artificial roost.
Mm.
Because if we're, if our trees are declining and that's what's driving population down for turkeys, is there, I guess, any need for that? Do people do that?
Yeah, there are some projects where folks I know of some people around I think in the Middle Concho watershed around San Angelo that are using utility poles to make artificial turkey
Mm.
roost. I think
Hmm.
I haven't seen it. I think they're erecting some vertical poles and then putting some horizontal poles along it. And I don't know really. I need to make a plan to go look at it actually, but you can I've seen photos of things like that before. It's not yes, it's good roosting. It's a roosting site for them. It's not what you really want to see in the
Mhm.
landscape, but it's a substitute. And so um, I'm curious actually about that project and how it's going to work and whether the turkeys, how they respond to it. But it makes sense because you'll see them depending on where you're at on the landscape up on a utility pole. So
They might like it.
they'll use it, and so yeah, there's definitely it's a possibility. In
Yep.
places where roosting habitat is really limited, it's a good, at least short-term way to, if you have turkeys but roosts are declining, it's a good way to provide a place for them to go for a while until you can reestablish, the trees that they really would prefer. So, yeah,
Yeah, because I guess the biggest thing about being on those, I'll say the artificial roosts is at that point it could be potentially exposure to
yeah,
the elements, but
yeah,
is there any like predation wise? I mean, I don't think I no, they're bigger than well, a young turkey,
yeah,
nice
yeah.
snack for like a great horned owl.
Mhm.
I don't know, would there be anything else that would maybe go after some of those younger
Up,
raptors? I mean, I guess, well, raptor.
you on the roost, poults, juveniles are going to be vulnerable to things like owls, especially. They'll take a poult off of a roost at night if they're able to fly up to it, and um, there's a it's a that's giant a giant question about turkey predation, and they're a ground nesting bird. The chicks
Mhm.
takes them 2 or 3 weeks to even be able to fly, so they have to have kind of some temporary places where the hen knows it's hopefully safe to take the chicks at night and they can't even fly up into a roost at first.
I was gonna say,
And then,
does the hen still go up to roost and she leaves the poult? That's something I'd never, honestly, I'd never thought about the fact that the does the hen go up or does she stay on the ground with the poults?
I think sometimes, but usually she's going to tend to those chicks and
Yeah.
shelter them until they can. And there's even I've seen photos of hens with a group of poults, and they're able to fly up to low limbs at
Mm.
first, after a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and then, hens, mama's still got her wings out, kind of trying to shelter them from view and from the potential of, a great horned owl that's hungry in the late evening or whatever. So it's, and that's the thing with the roosting habitat too, is it changes. So a hen with young juveniles that are barely able to fly, they need, maybe some of those younger trees that have horizontal limbs that the poults can get up onto from the ground until they are better able to fly higher and get into more mature trees. And so it changes from, when you have really young chicks to more brushy cover that's, can conceal the chicks well, or, really, healthy grasses or whatever. So herbaceous cover or shrub cover that's going to hide and provide concealment at night into, maybe young and medium age trees, and then finally into mature trees when they can fly up into a normal roost. So,
And I think that's what's challenging of it. Doesn't even matter if it's turkeys, deer, is it's with management of any wildlife, it's you're thinking of not just the adults. Because in order to get the adults, you got
right.
to have the young. So it's like the young, what the young need is going to be the basic needs are still the same, but it's going to look just a little bit different for
Yeah.
each
And
different stage, each time of year. It's a sliding scale.
it's right. And the interesting thing with upland game birds and turkey and quail both kind of have those with turkey, you've got the three main components of their habitat that they need for their annual cycle. So roosting sites with the right kind of screening cover and landing zones. You have to have, nesting habitat looks different for the hens. They nest on the ground. And then, probably the most limiting thing is a really good brooding cover and what I mean is, a place for their chicks to feed. They need, grasses and forbs, a lot of protein rich forbs, which are weeds we want versus weeds, we forbs are weeds we want, weeds are forbs that we don't want. So, areas that have, a lot of bare ground where those little poults can move through the vegetation below those green leafy forbs and grasses and find insects. And, that kind of habitat usually requires some kind of natural disturbance, fire, mechanical, whatever it is. And, we've interrupted those natural processes. And so brooding cover is the most limiting thing, probably in most places for turkeys, and probably the same is true for quail. So, um, but that you mentioned they move a lot, so that's the deal. Those hens when they're nesting, they spread out. They've got to find areas with 18 to 24 inch tall grasses and forbs, or with some scattered shrubs that they can hide in while they nest, and they need that habitat I described for the chicks when they hatch, and that takes a lot of area
Mhm.
to provide all that. And really, we talk about it in our Habitat Home program a lot, Liz. That the home range of a turkey can be upwards of 2,000 acres, which is bigger than the average whitetail. So
Which is, it's crazy because I mean,
yeah,
turkeys are like what? Like, shoot, not even like a third. They're like an eighth the
right.
size of a white-tailed deer, but they require a lot more
They move
space,
around. Yeah,
which I think shocks a lot of people because they're like, well, my turkeys just disappeared. It's like, well, they probably just went on a
Elsewhere.
walkabout and they'll be back.
yeah,
They'll be
they'll be
back.
back. Yeah.
At some point, they'll be back. It's just they got to go somewhere else for a time.
So do they like I guess what's the reason behind that? Are they looking for something and then they come back to kind of home base, or do they wander?
Well, part of it has to do with nesting. So
Okay.
the hens will spread out as they kind of isolate themselves and find good nesting cover, which usually is going to be shrubby, grassy areas that they can see. They can see
Yeah.
predators, but they're pretty well concealed, and they kind of have to seek those areas out and find those spots, and they spread out while they nest. Um, and so that's a part of it. If you have a flock of 100 turkeys, they've got to have a lot of ground to
A lot
spread
of
out on,
space.
and um, whenever it's nesting time, and then they've got to be able to move around that landscape to feed those chicks in those, kind of grassy, forby areas that provide good brooding habitat, and that habitat's not abundant. So a lot of times they're wandering around looking for those sites where there's
Hmm.
been disturbance of some kind, um, and it's producing that kind of cover for the chicks. And then if we're in dry West Texas, like we said, those big mature trees might not be common. So they've got to go out during the day for foraging, and then they've got to come back to those roost sites in the evening. And just because of the nature of that, they can cover a lot of ground. And they'll use, in the wintertime, they kind of use some traditional roost sites where you'll get bigger numbers of turkeys showing up to the same grove of trees or whatever. Um, but other times of the year, they'll use kind of, satellite roost where as they're utilizing an area, they'll find roost sites nearer to that temporarily that they use for a while. But so over the course of the year, you can see these roost sites will shift across the landscape. And then in the wintertime, they kind of tend to aggregate back into places where it's a little bit more of a traditional roost site. So,
So we've kind of touched on predation a little bit with, the poults, mostly, especially at night you get, owls can predate, but what are some other predators of, obviously we can't control owls, legally
yeah,
control owls,
yeah.
or raptors of any kind. So what are some of the other predators on the landscape that
Good
can
question.
eat both? I mean, or is that something that we don't really know a whole lot?
No, there's there's a long list of culprits. For turkey nest, the primary predator is probably raccoons. They're overabundant in most landscapes and can really wreak havoc on turkey nests in a lot of places. Um, Bobcats will also take, turkey poults especially. They would, probably mess with a nest if they found one, but they're more active hunters and they'll even try to take adult turkeys. I don't know how successful. Definitely will take some adult birds too, but so you've got that, coyotes will destroy a nest if they find it, or they'll also pursue. So you've got a lot of different mammalian, mesocarnivore predators that will have an impact. Raccoon's probably the biggest. I think depending on what literature you're reading, maybe the hens actually nest successfully, and then half of those nests survive to hatching, and then half of those poults survive. So it's even though they might lay 10 eggs, only maybe a handful of those poults might make it if at all, just because of that predation pressure. So it's mammals on the ground, the aerial predators that you talked about. Other things like fire ants can destroy a nest real quickly if they get into a nest. Um, Especially at hatching, you have that yolk and that stuff going on in the nest that attracts ants, and it you know probably the biggest culprit, raccoons, would be the top of the list for nesting birds. But yeah, there's a long list of things that think turkeys are tasty besides us, and
I think
so
turkeys are pretty delicious. I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie. They are pretty delicious. So I guess pigs would also probably be
yes,
would very much take advantage of a nest or potentially a turkey poult. What about
yep.
white-tailed deer?
What about them?
Oh wait, no, was that a oh no, I'm getting that mixed up of oh gosh, it was a while back, but there was a documented case of a turkey eating a quail.
Ah,
Sorry, I
well,
got that backwards. I was like, because I thought of like
yep,
deer eating the birds in the backyard. So not the typical fare, but apparently
yep.
it happens
It,
every now.
Huh.
yeah, there's some crazy stuff that happens. Turkeys are looking for, mostly invertebrate prey when they're raising those chicks. So the main food source is protein-rich food, legumes, leafy forbs that are protein rich, and especially insects. And then through the year, that's even what the adults are eating. But they'll also switch, depending on the time of the year, to, mast crops from oak trees and stuff like that. But berries whenever they're around. So they have kind of a mixed diet, but it's generally a protein-rich diet. And um, I suppose if the right tasty feathered snack came along, they might grab it. I've seen roadrunners take birds. I've seen roadrunners actively hunt bird feeders before, which is really crazy.
Interesting.
But
Roadrunners
so
are those weird
yeah,
that one of those weird animals that I don't think people
they're like,
appreciate them enough, like just
no,
how
yeah,
resourceful, I guess
yeah,
would be the
right.
term.
Hmm.
They truly are. And I mean, no wonder, Roadrunner always outsmarted Wile E. Coyote because
Mhm.
coyotes are
I
smart,
was
but
just
I
thinking
think
that.
Roadrunners are maybe just a little bit smarter.
And to be fair, in even like in the example of the Roadrunner, most of their diet's reptiles,
Yeah.
like they're,
Mm.
or insects. They're not, they'll take a bird when they have the opportunity, but they're not,
They're not
it's
seeking
not
it.
the regular daily diet,
Mhm.
so um
And I
that
mean, if
makes
you're
sense.
and definitely if you're curious on your property and your property's large enough to go turkey hunting,
Hmm.
harvest turkey, look at the crops, see what they're eating.
Right.
Some of those things might be hard to identify,
See what they're eating for sure,
but
yeah.
definitely you can see what they're eating and then you can, manage for that a little bit. Now, obviously that's going to be springtime, not necessarily what they're eating in the fall or the summer, but it's a good way to at least get an idea
Yeah.
of what they might be eating during that time. Um, so I guess let's take a step back to you had mentioned like nesting
Mhm.
habitat. So what does like nesting habitat look like for a turkey?
So good healthy stands of bunch grasses with a mix of weeds, forbs, whatever you want, and also a mix of shrubs. So they'll use grasses in a pasture if it's tall enough and conceals them well. So generally you're talking, most of the literature you read is like 18 to 24 inches tall. Imagine a hen sitting on a nest, trying to stay hidden, but also wanting to be able to see the horizon around her to detect predators on the landscape. So they'll find kind of a little bit, I don't, for lack of a better way to describe it, maybe some rank pasture habitat that's got taller, grasses and forbs or shrubs. They'll get into shrubby areas, and then once that nest hatches, quickly those chicks move, and they're going to a completely different looking area in many cases. So not always, but if that makes sense. So you know, if you can think about a pasture in the spring that's got some shrubs and lots of some tall weeds and some grasses, but maybe in general not more than 24 inches tall or so, like knee to thigh high, you'd see that could possibly provide habitat for them to nest in. And
And
in more forested areas, those shrubby areas in the understory will provide cover. So
and do the hens really, because toms have absolutely nothing to do with the nest. Single mom, turkey moms, all the way single mom.
yep.
Um, do they really get off the nest much during incubation, or do they pretty well stick it out?
They tend to nest a lot, and so they'll leave to to get food or water, and defecate, or sometimes I think some hens will get off the nest for roost until the at least until the clutch is complete or whatever. And so, but yeah, once they have a full clutch, they're gonna stay on that nest quite a bit, and then once the eggs hatch, those chicks are mobile pretty fast.
Mhm.
They don't, it's not like a lot of other birds where that mom is going to stay on that nest for another 3 weeks while the birds grow feathers. They kind of hatch and they're ready to go. They're
Yep. They don't
running
have the
around.
safety of a tree to
Right.
hang out in
Yeah.
for weeks on end, or they
Yeah.
gotta go. They gotta
Yeah. They
go.
can't fly, but they can definitely run around and hide. And that's when she's going to get out of that. Those shrubby, you know, those grassy areas are great for nesting, but you want an area that's got a little bit more bare ground and more of those forbs for the chicks, because they've got to have space underneath those plants to get around in. They can't push their way through those.
So
If it's a really dense grass pasture, it's not great habitat because the chicks can't get through it. And
yep,
so
so things like
you want
KR, Bermuda grasses, a lot of those,
right.
the ones that look good to us, because when you mow them, they just take up a lot of ground. They're kind of hard
Yep.
to I know I get caught up sometimes in those, like, you're walking through Bermuda and you get those little runners and you catch your toe or something like that.
Yep.
I mean, it's a lot harder for the quail, or the turkeys, than we just say a bad word and keep walking. But
Yeah.
the poor little turkey
Yeah.
poults can't run fast enough
Aw.
Right.
to get through that. So you had mentioned water. So
Mhm.
what does water look like for a turkey?
Well, they need surface water. Especially, there's a high demand of water for the chicks. A lot of birds get a lot of water that they need from their diet, but you know, for example, we've talked about with quail, the adult quail don't necessarily need a lot of surface water, but the chicks do. And you know, turkeys will regularly visit surface water. You need to have, if you're in a dry landscape and you're trying to manage for turkeys, you want to have some ground level troughs around that the birds can get to for water. And at Martin Ranch, where one of our research ranches, we have one of the most common pictures, other than the goats and the hogs. We get lots of pictures of turkeys at the water troughs. So they regularly visit that for a drink, and it's important for them to have that. So yeah, it's West
Okay.
Texas. Everybody's thirsty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. All the time. All the time. Okay, so let's see. We've covered food a little bit. We've covered roosting habitat, we've covered nesting habitat. Is there any other habitat we're kind of missing? I feel like
Not, I mean, we've kind of hit on brooding habitat. It's imagine a weedy pasture, grasses and forbs with a lot of bare ground, and that's where those chicks will be able to thrive. Um, and if you want to kind of maybe switch gears and talk a little bit about how do you create that? So,
Yes,
how do you maintain good roosting habitat or
yes.
brooding cover or nesting habitat? And if you think about succession, you have a pasture that goes through succession. If there's some disturbance, whether it's, you use a tractor to disturb the soil with a disc, or you have some grazing activity and hoof action that kind of stirs up the ground, or those things, or a combination with occasional fire. Depending on where you're at in the state, you might want fire more frequently than others. But you want to have places where that land gets kind of opened up and disturbed so that it encourages what a lot of people would just call weeds, green leafy herbaceous plants to grow in amongst, some grasses. So you want to mix. And ideally, brooding cover is going to have some scattered shrubs for stuff to, run to for shelter if there's a hawk flying over or whatever. Or those forbs are tall enough with bare ground underneath that the chicks are kind of concealed below that canopy of weeds or forbs. And so you can use grazing in a place like that. And if you do some grazing in the wintertime, for example, it can create the soil disturbance and open up or move some of that thatch so that when spring rains hit, you get that flush of forbs that comes up in that habitat. That's what those chicks need. Um, and then as succession happens, maybe some of that stuff gets encroached some with shrubs, and you may want to kind of limit how much those shrubs take over. You don't want shrubs everywhere, but you do want some shrubs around for nesting cover and screening cover for chicks and loafing cover. Um, and then for
Quick
the
question with the screening cover. So with
yeah,
quail, it's generally like they say like a softball's throw
yeah,
away.
yeah.
Do we have like an analogy for turkeys as to like
Yeah,
spacing of?
it it's not as specific.
Mhm.
Like, they definitely will escape. Turkeys like edges a lot, so and if you can imagine places in the Edwards Plateau or other places in the state where you have these fields with lots of edge, they'll use those
What
edges to
is
escape.
edge? What are we talking about with when we
So
say edge?
that's a good question. It's a transition between maybe more of a wooded or a shrubland area into more of a grassland or pasture area, if that makes sense. Um, and it provides a place to escape. And so turkeys are really kind of they're edgy birds. They like those edges a lot more. Um, Definitely with quail, that whole, the whole, you hear the Rolling Plains quail folks always talking about a softball toss to a shrub is a good place for a quail to escape to. But in between, they need that grass and forb mix. And turkeys can tolerate, a little bit more shrub cover than that in places, but those chicks especially still need that kind of early
Mhm.
successional habitat for finding insects and stuff. So you'll find turkeys in wooded areas that you won't find quail in, put it that way.
So
Um,
turkey's a little bit more, they like a little bit more brush woody vegetation than something like a quail
Absolutely.
does.
Yeah, and you'll find, in the right kinds of habitat in, heavily wooded areas all over the southeastern US, turkeys are common, depending on, whether there's some of that more open brood rearing habitat and nesting cover for hens. And if it has those components, you'll find turkeys there also. So
So are there certain times of the year that you should avoid doing any treatments or anything like that because it might disturb the turkeys or disturb certain parts of their, I'll say their life cycle?
well, you want to try to not disrupt roosts. Just because the turkeys will begin to avoid a site if that roost is regularly disturbed. So that's one thing, and that's kind of year round, but especially those traditional winter roost that are, kind of old historic sites for these birds. Um, and most people know that. They know, don't disturb a roost. In the nesting season, if you've got decent, nesting cover for birds and you're planning some, shrub thinning or tree thinning activity to help enhance the habitat for your birds, you might want to wait until the nesting season's done and then make sure that there's plenty of brood rearing habitat around while you're doing that work and that kind of thing, if that makes sense. So you might
Yeah.
avoid that. Um, Sometimes in some places the best time to do prescribed fire is actually during the time when turkeys are nesting. And so there's a lot of conversations about timing of prescribed fire and how that affects nesting habitat. And in landscapes where there's plenty of that habitat around, it's okay. It creates a patchwork and so you might not want to hay. Most people aren't going to be cutting hay that time of the year anyways, but it's a good idea to avoid places where turkeys are nesting if you're doing that kind of habitat management or other doing other things. So
And so, what would be like nesting season? Like when would it kind of start? When would it kind of wrap up? And it varies obviously across the state. And some years you get where they
yeah,
go really late and you're like, why are you still nesting in, August? I don't know.
it's
Can they go super late? I mean, I guess if it's really good conditions, they'll
uh, not usually. I
okay.
mean, I don't know if you read a lot of stuff, you might find some pretty late nesting records, but you know, peak gobbling activities happening right now. Like in,
Yep.
the places that I'm spending time, even a couple weeks ago, there were gobblers going crazy all over the place. And so those hens are, those hens are breeding and they're going to nest right now, tending nests now, and that'll continue on into May. Kind of that's the peak. There'll be some stragglers. There may be some that were a little early. So pretty soon, May, June, you'll see hens with poults running around. If you're in good places where they're occurring, and on into summer, those hens will start to kind of reform flocks with those poults, and as we get on into those summer months, you'll see bigger groups of birds and all that. So yeah,
Okay. Well, I
it's
mean,
happening now.
it's one of those things, there's always more to talk about, but I think we've pretty well covered sort of the basics of turkey management. Carly, you got any other questions?
No, my like biggest question was those last couple of ones. So that was very helpful for me. I took some notes. So thanks for helping us learn a little bit about turkeys.
Yes.
Even
Yeah,
even if you already know a little bit, hopefully you learned something today. So it was good.
yeah, you bet. And the only thing I'd add is, for your small acreage folks, like this is maybe the focus here. So don't be afraid to manage what you can.
Mhm.
It might support part of the life cycle, and if you have a group of neighbors that have a common goal, you can do that together. So think about that
Absolutely.
as well.
No, I think that's a very good point is even, obviously if you're on 20, 50, 100 acres, you're not going to house a population of turkeys, but
Right.
if you have really good, like Andy said, if you have really good roosting habitat, probably don't do much to the roosting habitat,
Yeah.
but any other sort of habitat, work with what you got is and make it the best that it can be.
Yep.
But all right. Well, I got 1 o'clock,
On
so
the dot.
on the dot, on the dot. So we will let y'all go. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We will see y'all next week. What did we have next? I don't remember what we have next week. I know we talked about
Oh,
this.
the rainwater harvesting.
Oh, rainwater
Oh,
harvesting
cool.
next week. So I feel like that's very timely because I don't know
Yeah.
about y'all. We got quite a bit of rain here this past weekend. Did you get any, Andy? Or you
Yeah.
got okay, did you get
Yeah, we did.
good. So the rain has arrived. It's just a matter of will it continue
Yes.
throughout the summer every now and again. But all right, everyone. So tune in next week. We hope y'all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you down the road. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.